Well, hello, everybody. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you for joining our live panel celebrating women in agriculture, wellness, safety, and leadership. And thank you to CASA for your continued industry leadership in this space. I'm Christina Stroud, and I head up the corporate affairs team at Syngenta Canada, and we're happy to sponsor our event today. And I'll be moderating the panel and maybe participating a little bit here and there. Joining me on the panel today are Cynthia Beck, Director of Sask Ag Matters Network, and Lori Brookhouse, Owner-Operator of Vital Insight Safety and HR Consulting. And again, thank you for joining today. And before we dive into our discussion, which is going to be fantastic, I'm going to give a couple of comments on the format, what you can expect. And I'm going to hand it over to Robin Anderson, Director of Programs and Communications with CASA, for some opening comments. And I think we're putting in a little bit of a poll survey at the front end. So we're going to be on the call today for an hour. We have a discussion period, which will be, in and around 40 minutes or so, and then open up to Q&A. Because this is a Zoom webinar, we're recording it and we will share it out after, but we won't be able to hear you. So we ask that you use the Q&A for any questions that you might have. And we have Q&A at the end, but we'll keep an eye on it because some of the questions may fit better as we're moving along. But feel free to use the chat as well. And we ask that the chat is where you might want to have some discussions or make some additional comments, and we'll leave the Q&A for the questions so we can see them quite easily. I think those are all sort of the housekeeping and the setup, and I will hand it over to Robin for some comments. Robin?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Christina. Sorry, I jumped the gun there for a quick second. I just want to say thank you so much for everyone that is attending here today. And thank you to our panelists and Syngenta for sponsoring this great event. We're really excited to talk about women in agriculture. So just maybe a little bit about CASA for those not familiar. The Canadian Agricultural Safety Association was formed in '93 to respond to issues of health and safety in agriculture. So in those 31 years, CASA, which is a national not-for-profit organization, continues to work collaboratively with partners to support research programs and other initiatives that equip Canadian producers, farm families, farm workers, and farming communities with the information and tools they need to recognize risk and manage hazards on the farm. And ultimately, CASA's vision is a safe, sustainable agriculture where healthy Canadian farm communities thrive. And as a part of that, we know that women are indispensable to the strength and the successes of farms across the country and to the entire agricultural industry. So we know that even 1/3 of farms have women as primary decision makers, either through a sole proprietorship or as a partnership, according to the Canadian Census of Agriculture. And as vital as they are to the success of family farms, sometimes women's roles are undervalued and unacknowledged. Unfortunately, there is a bit of a limited research and information that measures and provides assessment of experiences of farm women in their own voices. And with that in mind, CASA contributed to a groundbreaking study that Farm Management Canada undertook that provided serious insight into the experiences of farm. And this research team, they created a steering committee of farm women from across the country. They took a look at the existing literature and data, conducted one-on-one interviews, conducted a nationwide survey, summarized their findings, and created an analysis of the results. And from that, CASA created an executive summary detailing the health and safety findings. My colleague Megan is going to pop into the chat that link that you can check out that summary. And at the end of that, you can also see the whole report if you click through the links. And I just want to say for clarity, the report and research team recognizes the diversity of gender identities and the use of the terms woman, woman, and man, men in the report are not intended to be exclusive to any other gender identity. And using these terms, no distinction is made or assumed between cisgender and affirmed gender identity. So just diving into that research a little bit, there were some seriously interesting key findings. Women are pivotal to safety plans on the farm. 46% of women reported that they are responsible for creating and implementing safety plans. And furthermore, 25% said that without them, a focus on safety wouldn't even exist. 68% of women said finding safety apparel that fits isn't easy. And 42% agreed with the statement that equipment and machinery are not designed with women in mind. 65% of women reported experiencing stress when they think about the possibility of injuring the farm. And almost half said that stresses related to the farm negatively impact their health. Safety of children is also a top concern for women on the farm. 64% said that caring for children due to a lack of daycare is concerning from a safety perspective. And sadly, 29% of respondents said that others on the farm do not respect their opinion regarding health and safety. Women are incredible, farming, often working off farm, managing the books, balancing family. That includes raising children, caring for aging parents, and then being a good friend and community member. These things bring many, many joys, but also many stresses and safety concerns. So at CASA, we want to work to enrich the lives of women in agriculture, celebrate their successes, and acknowledge their lived experiences. So I just want to say thank you so much to Christina, Cynthia, and Lori for being women in agriculture and supporting women in agriculture. It means so much to me personally, but it also means a great deal to CASA as we work towards a safe, healthy, and successful future. So before I turn it over to Christina, we'd like to get a sense of our audience today. So we have 2 short polls, and we'll give you some time to answer each of the questions. And we just want to thank our audience for being here as well today. So I'm going to ask Ron to pop up our first poll, if that's okay. So do you identify as a woman in agriculture? So pick one. Great. And then once we're ready, we can pop up that next poll. Look at that, 80%. That's amazing. Well, welcome to all of us. This is a little bit longer, so we'll give you a little bit more time to read. How do you best describe your involvement in agriculture? And I know you might feel like you're more than one. You probably are. So pick the best one that describes you, even though I wish we could do multiple choice in a word cloud, because I know there'd be plenty of great feedback. Fantastic. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to hand it back over to Christina and Cynthia and Lori. Thank you so very much.
Thanks, Robin. And we'll see Robin on the back end for the Q&A as well. So the findings from the study that Robin referenced are going to form the basis of our discussion. And I think it's a very important discussion. According to Census Canada, 1/3 of farms have women as primary decision makers, either sole proprietor or partnership. And as you heard Robin say, sometimes their roles are unacknowledged or there's limited initiatives taken to measure and provide some quantifiable assessment and experience of farm women. So we're really glad to be talking about this study today. And so we are going to reference this study, but we're also going to learn through the knowledge and lived experiences of our panels and possibly our audience. If you have comments that you'd like to make as you reflect on what we talk about, please put those in the chat, because it offers knowledge and learning beyond those of us just sitting on the panel. So before I jump into some specific questions, and we'll the questions will drive sort of what we're talking about, but the conversation will be very fluid. I'm just going to ask both Lori and Cynthia to take 1 minute quickly to talk about their personal experience as a woman in Canadian agriculture, and then we'll get into some very specific details. So Cynthia, why don't you go first in a minute or so? What's your personal experience as a woman in Canadian agriculture?
So I was born and raised on a mixed cattle and grain farm in rural Saskatchewan, and then went away to the big city for a little while and then returned back to Saskatchewan and married a farmer. So now I'm part of a multi-generational mixed cattle and grain farm. And like many other rural and farm women, I think that there's many of us who wear multiple hats. So I just want to quickly throw out a shout out and hope that every person on here takes a moment to acknowledge the multiple roles that you play on your farm and extend a little bit of gratitude and appreciation towards yourself.
Lori?
Thanks, Christina. So kind of going back years and years and years. So started working on farm, my grandmother's beef farm, and then we had this old cow, Bessie, that we had to milk, and that's what our source of milk was. And then of course, going through high school, the odd jobs and things were always on local farms, fruit, vegetable, pheasant farm. And then of course, I went to the Nova Scotia Agricultural College and walked away with a tech diploma in biology, which carried me through veterinarian labs, working for the Animal Resource Center at the University of Calgary, having my own garden center, working for Green Creations, where we maintained a lot of different gardens and things like that in the surrounding Truro area here. And then, of course, just finding out and learning about occupational health and safety throughout those few jobs and not really having much implemented. So here we are. I'm one of those ladies that took on that role of safety and said, we need this. So that's where it ended up. And then it was just word of mouth thereafter. So for the last 17 years, I've been just kind of hopping around one place to the next with Vital Insight being my clientele, hopping around and talking to various clients and building either full safety programs or parts of programs, just seeing what their needs are and how we could fit them into existing programs that they already have so that it can become a valuable source. And I guess we're going to talk about that in a little bit too.
We are, yeah, and it sounds like networking has formed a good part of the success in your career, Lori. I know networking certainly has been a big part of my success as I've moved through my journey in agriculture. So thanks very much. Let's start off. Our first topic is going to be focusing around farm safety leadership. And according to the study, as Robin had said, 46% of farm women reported they are responsible for creating and implementing a safety plan on their farm. But respondents also said they have to constantly remind people about safety issues on the farm, and that without them, there would not be probably a safety focus. And 29% say their opinions are not respected. So we look in the context of farm safety leadership. Cynthia, I'll start with you. Just comment on how women's leadership in farm safety impacts the women themselves, but maybe also touch on the broader farming community and the leadership role they play in that as well, if you could, and then we'll just chat about it.
So two things kind of really came to mind or the forefront when I overheard Robin talking about that research. It's very interesting to me that that percentage of women take on the leadership role for safety. Not only do they take on the leadership role for safety, it requires constant reminders. And then not only that, there's the additional piece of not feeling appreciated or heard with that. It kind of led to me thinking about the perception that women nag, which let's unpack that term right now, which actually means provide care and concern to others. So please know that I'm speaking from that point of view. I do find that interesting. So I think that's something that, to kind of reflect on and think about for other people, especially if you are in a multi-generational farm operation or have employees or farm family members, where recognizing the role that the safety leader plays. The other thing that kind of really jumped out at me is for women, we carry a really high cognitive load. So that refers to all of the things that we have to think about, or every piece that we take care of to keep all of the parts moving, will not, add in that safety factor to that as well. I think that speaks to the amount of cognitive capacity or cognitive load capacity that women have. We're powerhouses, let's own it. But also it kind of speaks to, if we're the person responsible for that leadership when we're carrying that load and then the voice isn't heard, there are negative mental health outcomes that can come from that, where you're kind of doing the work and you're constantly using your voice and your brain power, but you're not being heard, which can really lead to challenges with anxiety and depression symptoms. So those were kind of the two pieces that really came to mind for me out of that.
Can you talk? It's interesting hearing you say about nagging, because I think I'm I'm not on a farm, but my kids also use that term, and I tell them I like to call it parenting. And so we have, but anyhow, it is a term that's used repeatedly. So can you talk also about the farming community and the leadership and the intersection sort of that leadership within the farming community as it relates to the support that they might get in the community or lack of in the community?
I think that it plays to the multiple roles that women just automatically take on. It's interesting. There's so many different perspectives here that kind of come to mind. And depending on the hat that you're wearing on any given day, like if I put on my psychologist hat right now and kind of look at this perspective about the roles that women take on in leadership within the farming community, I think that if you were to look at a farm family, a lot of farm families volunteer in the community, whether it's within agriculture or outside of agriculture. So the leadership, the role even extends further than that. I do wonder sometimes if, and this is something that I would find really interesting to hear from folks listening, their perspective, is when you are volunteering in the community or demonstrating that leadership in agriculture within the agricultural community or the rural community, do you feel almost more appreciated, more heard, and more supported when you're out there in your community environment than you do when you are at home, where it's kind of, you're always there and always present? So it's easy to not recognize, it's that old cliche of you don't know what you have until it's gone, right? I don't know if that kind of speaks to that point, Christina.
Yeah, it does, because I think it's a good point, because it's an assumed role that you're going to play on the farm. It talks a little bit about, Robin was talking about, where some of the survey women are feeling they're not, some of the roles that they play are not appreciated or not recognized in the same way. So I think it really speaks to that.
If I could add one more thing, I also think that for women, we downplay the roles that we play. We kind of go, oh, that's okay. It was nothing. And it's really hard to have an expectation of other people appreciating us when we don't take ownership of the role that we're playing, the extent of the role that we're playing, or we don't even appreciate ourselves for the amount that we're doing. So I think that we need to have, we need to take a little bit more ownership for ourselves in appreciating all that we're doing.
Yeah. And we're doing some of that on International Women's Day, but it's one day of the year. I think it's really important to do it throughout the year.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Lori, can you comment, on the farming operation itself and some of the pragmatic aspects of safety leadership?
Absolutely. I kind of have that same nagging mom comment in my notes here as well, in the sense that they're the ones that are developing the programs, making sure things are in place. Personal protective equipment is ordered for the workers, or anything that they need in relation to safety and the workers' perspective is going to be provided. So with that, though, they're also wanting to implement policies and procedures, and that's not necessarily supported because it's not that common to have written safety programs in agriculture. They're very few and far between Canada-wide, right? So when you look at that and having the program itself not fully respected, how do you gain that respect from the workers when they don't know that it should exist on farm and that there is support of why the women leaders are asking them to participate in these programs? But further to that, you talk about community, and then you talk about the farm family, or who is working on the farm. So who supports what? So within the farm itself, whether it be a farm family, or if you're working with a hierarchy of different levels on the farm of workers, do they support the program? So if they see it as an extra piece that is added in to all the other things they have to do when they go out to the field, when they're operating equipment, whatever their tasks are, they have a tendency to kind of roll their eyes and go, oh, it's one more thing there she's asking, right? So if they're not getting the support at that level, and they think it's kind of an extra piece of work that they have to do instead of supporting what they are doing, I think that makes it a little bit more challenging for women to implement these programs and support. But I think there is community support more so for programs because there's safety associations out there, commodity associations support it, and just other women that they're meeting at these organizations and these meetings support it. So I think on a community level, they're more supported than they are on the individual farm level. And that's what I've been hearing and seeing.
And Lori, I don't know if you have an example or not of where you found it's been successful, where how they get that farm plan heard and that level of recognition that keeps everybody safe on farm and reduces stress level for everybody, but for women on farm in particular. Can you give an example of a client that you've worked with or program that you've put together that you'd say this is one or two things that you've seen that tends to lead to success?
There's only about 1% of my clientele that have successful farm safety plans in place. And the reason behind that is because the partnership within the leadership group works. So they support each other's work and they're very vocal about it. So if we're having a safety meeting or if they're even going out and doing a pre-job assessment, right? So they're going to talk about what they're going to do that day. Safety is supported in that conversation and as part of that planning process. It's only when it's looked upon as an after the fact, or the nagging mom comes out and says, oh, don't forget to do this, right? And then that support isn't there from that top leadership group and being communicated all the way down. But it also has to come from below all the way up. So as you may know, occupational health and safety acts across the world are pretty much based on what we call the internal responsibility system. So there is a foundation for it. And I think it's that system that needs to be communicated more and then have all those partners within the farm support it. I think it would make and support the persons who are driving the program to have that program more successful.
Fantastic. And I should say, I'm not on my phone. I'm taking some notes as we go along here. So, anything else to add, Cynthia, before we move on to sort of the next topic area?
No, I don't think so. I think that we've covered it.
Covered. Good. So let's move to on-farm barriers and the impact of those. So child safety is a significant concern for many parents, but farm women often bear a larger portion of the burden. I found it quite staggering in going through the survey results. 64% say that caring for children due to the lack of daycare on its own is a safety concern for kids on the farm. That's a pretty big number. We know there's lack of daycare sort of across Canada, and it's an ongoing issue, hearing a good bit about it in the media. And it can be a barrier for women in career progression, and particularly in agriculture and on farm. And so there's also some other barriers that relate to running a farm. We mentioned it at the top end. Robin did safety apparel, equipment. It's either really expensive if you're gonna get it to fit well, or it isn't. It's poorly fitting, which causes a safety concern. So there's a multiple number of farm barriers for women, and they each have their own impact. Cynthia, we'll kick things off. What impact does being the primary caregiver have on women in the context of what we've just shared?
I think that, even kind of referring back to something that I mentioned before, it's another thing to keep track of. So it's another piece that adds to our cognitive load or the mental energy that we require to get through a day. I think that, I mean, in Saskatchewan, I can only speak to really in Saskatchewan, there may be daycare options available. However, living on the farm, I think that it's really difficult for a lot of us, or it was for me, when I was trying to work off the farm and then work on the farm as well. And justifying spending the time and the money to drive, the hour or whatever it was to your daycare and then return back the hour. So you just juggled and you made it work. And I think that a lot of, whether it's industry inside agriculture or industry outside of agriculture, the primary caregiver role for the kids in historically has fallen on women. And I can't say that is still the norm, because I haven't seen recent research data out there to identify that it's otherwise. So I think that it is difficult to juggle, if you're full-time on the farm and you're juggling the work on the farm, you're also juggling the safety aspects because not everything is designed from a women's perspective. Or I think it's also important to note that it's not designed for people who are otherwise abled as well, right? So those are definitely impacts that require more thinking, more energy, and more time. I think that also there's an increase in burnout for women when we're juggling all of those
Right.
different pieces, right? And I don't know though if we would ever recognize it as burnout, right? We might call it, well, I'm exhausted, or I'm not sleeping, or I'm just not eating in the day, or I'm not even realizing that you're not eating. So it is very interesting, and those research findings, in a way, they're not really surprising, but to have them come out and kind of be in your face like that, I think it identifies that we really do need to work on having alternative options for childcare, especially on the farm, or
Yeah.
having equipment that allows for the kids to travel safely with us too, right?
Mhm. Lori, would love to hear your view on these farm barriers and how they impact opportunities.
They do impact opportunities for sure. Especially if it's the woman's own farm, like the parent it's their farm and they aren't able to take their kids anywhere. There's no other caregiver there. It's a huge distraction for the mom. And that's always on the back of her mind. Where are they? What are they doing? Right? And so they may look away from something they're doing that's quite dangerous just because that's going to be top of mind. The moms will know that their parental instincts are very strong, and that's going to take over on any other task that they're doing. They need to know, and they will look, right? And they could be doing something else that could put them at risk as well for injury. There are programs like for kids as age 5 and up, so you can train kids when they're young, but it's just not enough at that point. But then you also look at kids' other needs. So if they get sick and they have to be home from school, what do we do with that? So I find a lot of farm owners, if they're going to another farm to work, find them unreliable, or they have to pick them up from school, especially in the remote rural areas. So the timing that they're available is much less as well. But then you look at their needs for personal protective equipment. It's not supportive. And you can see in some of the literature, and I have a couple books here that I'll reference in a bit, that there have been few studies done, but those studies have not even been very supported in the corrective actions taken because they see the women as complainers. Instead of just knowing though, that the average equipment and personal protective equipment is designed for your average size man, not your average size woman. So if you look at a pair of gloves that you're going to pick up and you need to use them to use any type of hand tool or whatever task that you're doing, that average size glove is going to be designed for a size 9 instead of a size 7. So that makes it very difficult for the woman to be able to work, but it also increases their risk for entanglement, getting those things caught in different tools and equipment, but it also increases their risk for strains and sprains because they're always trying to compensate for the gear that doesn't fit them. But if you consider something like fall protection designed for a 5'6" male, 5'7" male, and they are going to use this equipment, they're trying to rig it so it fits okay, but if they fall, for them that could result in a fatality based on how loose that equipment is and how it's going to change their impact of that fall. So it can be quite serious. And then of course, they're at a significant disadvantage when you consider now new equipment has to be purchased and the farm owner has very little profits and they don't want to spend those profits on providing equipment specific to women. And I'll reference 2 books that this is very clear in. One's written by Karen Messing right here out of Quebec, and she's done many studies over the years. And her book, Bent Out of Shape, Shame, Solidarity, and Women's Bodies at Work. And I think Megan can put that in the chat for me. She's done not much work out of agriculture, but even with healthcare and those and other types of plant jobs, and showing the lack of support for these studies, let alone putting in the corrective actions that are needed. But then there's also another book, Invisible Women, Data Bias in the World Designed for Men. And that's by Carolyn Criado Perez. And she's out of the US, but she's done a lot of studies going back to when the men were driving plows with their oxen, right? And it required a lot of upper body strength for them to be able to control the plow. So that automatically was something women couldn't do because our bodies are not designed to have that much upper body strength. Most of our strength is in our legs. So, but you can't drive a plow with your with your legs.
Right.
So they were moved into these other jobs that were use less upper body strength. So they were more using the hand tools and things like that. But as you know, even the handles of these hand tools are too large for the average size woman. They're long. So it also opens them up for different incidents and injuries that can potentially happen in those particular cases.
I'd be curious, and I don't know this, Lori, you may, but when I look at, women are 50% of the population, and I think about, the economic impact of that and removing women, in effect, there's a safety concern, but it also leads to removing women from the workforce, especially in farming, or we've talked about this, but it means you do certain roles, but not others. And that becomes your role on the farm, because you're not able to fully participate in all aspects of the farm safely. I guess you can, but not safely.
Right.
So there's probably quite an economic impact. I know there's been some studies done on the economic impact of women being removed from the workplace because of daycare. But I don't know the stats on the economic impact of women being removed from the workforce for some of the reasons, some of the things you're talking about, Lori. I don't know if that it exists at all, or is in maybe in part of that book, The Invisible Women. Does it talk to that at all?
It does. It talks about, in Bent Out of Shape, it really goes through the different, even the wages that they're being compensated at the rate. So if a man and a woman were both standing there in the field with their hoe, typically the man is getting $20 an hour while the woman is getting 14 or 15. So
Right.
you'll see in Bent Out of Shape, it really goes through the economical impact it has, just in wages, but also in women's ability to apply for positions that
Right.
require, or I should say, that have been kind of stated as men only jobs in the past, right? Like if you're looking at trades now too, electricians, plumbers, right? Carpenters, strongly male oriented positions, but doesn't mean women can't do them if they've been trained. And I know
Right.
we're going to get into some of that support a little bit
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
But,
Well, thank you for those book recommendations. Great to have them, and obviously a lot more to unpack, and more that we can unpack in the time we have. But let's move on to, because I want to make sure we talk about because a big part of this is talking about wellness and health, and impact of stress on health. Well, with some of the things that we've talked about. They're under significant pressure for all the things that we have talked about. So they not only they have the similar as everyone else on the farm. They farm success is defined by making it possible to ensure the farm's passed on to the next generation. We want to make sure that they're running a successful business and maximizing financial returns. But then also the added layer of achieving a balanced lifestyle. And you talked about this, Cynthia, it's a capacity issue. And the environmental scan from the survey, women were saying they feel they have higher stress levels than men. The maintaining the family, the farm team harmony, along with all these other figures, sort of start to stack up, and add some added complication to the stress that they're experiencing, and that it has a negative impact on the health of women on the farm. I mean, stress has negative impact on all of us, but there's compounding factors with women on the farm. And we talked about this a little bit, but if you can improve health, and if you invest in the support that women need, it'll undoubtedly help further expand opportunities for agriculture, so that you're fully maximizing the entire workforce. So let's talk a little bit about impact on stress and health. And Lori, maybe start with you. If we could talk about the stressors that you see are the most common amongst women in agriculture, and a little bit how might they be mitigated.
so you've heard the saying, if you want something done, give it to the busiest person.
Yeah.
And we've recognized that this person so far is the woman leader on the farm. So she does. And like you mentioned, Christina, there's many hats that they wear. They're the child caretakers. They're now taking care of the elderly parents that may be living with them or just down the road, right? They're administrators, they're bookkeepers, they're in charge of the safety program, they're applying for farm credit, they're in charge of regulatory compliance, they're part of commodity associations, community programs, and they have to fill in wherever else they're needed on the farm when time allows. I really don't know where they get all this time to make these things happen. But with these different activities that they're doing, they all have deadlines. The kids got to get on the bus at a certain time. The bus does not wait for them, right? They don't have time to drive them to school. So that's another important deadline. Your elderly parent down the road needs their breakfast with these medications at this time, and this time, right? So there's another thing that they have to meet. They can't just let it pass and get to it when they can. Farm credit applications have deadlines, right? Getting to meetings on time and even getting to farm tours on time. If it's dealing with livestock, you have to feed on time. Cows need to be milked on time, right? So depending on what it is, there's a lot of deadlines associated with these tasks. And I think from what I'm hearing is that's the largest stressors is you can't necessarily prioritize and what needs to be done first. Your prioritization is more in the sense of what has to happen first based on the timelines, right?
Right.
School kids
Yes.
get on the
Yeah.
bus at 8 a.m. Parents get their medication at 9 a.m., right? So whatever those times are, that's how things have to be prioritized. And sometimes they can all come to head at once. And so that I think has become very stressful with them.
And all
Mm.
equally important. It's hard to say, what can't you do from that list, you know?
Right. You can't just scratch it off and say, we'll do that tomorrow, right? So from that though, some women thrive on that. And those I find typically who've grown up in that type of atmosphere have typically thrived. And we talked a little bit about burnout, and they won't say they're burnt out. They'll just say, I just need a rest, right? Just a little rest. And it may work for some, but not others. But I find those that marry into the farm don't handle those stresses as well, and they show that, but they are good at reaching out for support more so than those who have been born into it. So it's interesting. It's kind of almost two different types of stresses and how they're dealt with.
Yeah. That's interesting, the born on the farm and born into, and how you might deal with it differently. My mom used to say, taking the net, my mom used to say, I'm just taking 40 winks. So, and she'd
Right.
be charging back at it. So
May I
ahead.
add to that quickly?
Absolutely.
I think, Lori, you've made some really important points there. And I think that another thing that occurs when we're really busy meeting deadlines is that, again, we put our personal needs last.
Yes.
So I don't know how many times you kind of run out the door, you got the kids on the bus or you got the kids to whatever activity, you're headed out to check cows or there's calving or whatever. And we do so without properly fueling our bodies. So, and there's a lot of research out there on the impacts of poor nutrition and dehydration having negative mental health outcomes. So I just really want to point that out. If it's one thing that folks can take away, drink some water in the morning, fuel your body, like eat something, please. Eat something nutritious, a protein preferably, and pack snacks for the day. Like quite often, I think that, if you're headed out to sort cattle or you're checking pastures and you've got your kids with you, I don't know how many times I packed snacks for the kids and I had juice boxes and I had all of this stuff for the kids, but I didn't even think to pack anything for myself. Or I would pack stuff for my spouse and make sure that he was fueled. But again, I wouldn't take it for myself.
Right. Self-care is so important.
Right. Well, and I think that there's a lot of negative connotations that we attribute to the term self-care, but I think that we just need to view it as self-maintenance, right? We would never expect to drive our tractor with 3 tires. That would be ludicrous. But we run on 3 cylinders instead of 4 all the time.
I love that, self-maintenance. That's a great way to describe it, Cynthia. And you look at anyone an athlete or anyone
Mhm.
who's into fitness, they take their nutrition seriously because their body needs it or it can't function at its maximum level.
Absolutely. And if you look at the demands, like even hearing everything that we've talked about so far this afternoon, you look at the demands that we place our body or our brain under. Well, how can you adequately meet those demands when you're running on a low tank of fuel? Really,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Cynthia, can you just, while you're on there, can you talk a little bit more also to the connection there and to the mental health piece of it and the intersection of their leadership roles? And are there unique challenges and benefits associated with this, and what's the stress and burden related to mental health?
I think that for women who are playing a leadership role, there are benefits and there are detriments as well. Kind of speaking to what Lori said, if you were raised in that environment, if you were raised on the farm, you are really used to that momentum. However, at some point in time, it's really important that we recognize that we may be avoiding, like we may be using an avoidance coping strategy to manage stuff because we're working harder. And I think that's like the number one coping strategy that we use in farming, regardless of whether you're male, female, or otherwise. Anytime we're dealing with something or we have a lot of stress going on, we put our noses to the ground and we work harder and,
Right.
well, we'll get through this by getting more done. But in those instances, we're putting ourselves even further on the back burner by doing more work. So for women in leadership roles, if you're in a leadership role where you have supportive members around you, if you have supportive folks that you're working with, you feel heard, you feel appreciated, or even you recognize, like you have some personal insight to recognize that what you're doing makes a difference in that leadership role, those have positive implications or positive impacts on your mental health. However, if you are in a leadership role where you feel ineffective or you are made to feel that you're ineffective, then they can have negative impacts on your mental health.
Right.
So it is really important to make yourself a priority. Like I kind of call it the totem pole or your to-do list. You add yourself to the top of your to-do list. It's not selfish. You're practicing self-maintenance, and you are more effective and more productive in your world when you've looked after yourself first.
I'm also hearing in there, in addition to the taking care of yourself, giving yourself credit for what you're doing, telling yourself you're awesome, and maybe supporting others within your community to let, within the family or the farm, to remember to acknowledge the great work and the role that women play on the farm.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting to me, like when we're trying to be heard and be seen, yet we invalidate ourselves all the time by negating when people say, "Oh, you did such a great job," and we're like, "Oh, it was nothing."
Right.
Like, come on,
Or
So
I could have done that a little better.
yes. And it's really a part of productivity on the farm is recognizing our successes, how it was successful, and even unpacking that further or going a bit deeper. How do we define success? Right. So depending on your state of mental health and well-being, you may define success as being able to get out of bed, get dressed, and go provide care for your livestock or get your work done on the farm.
Right.
Somebody who is in a challenged state of mental health, that is huge. That is a very significant success, right? But often we don't allow ourselves to take that time where we prioritize ourselves and go, okay, how do I actually measure success? Or how am I actually doing today?
Yes.
And I would just like to mention, when we're talking about work-life balance, I personally speaking, I think that is a bit of we're setting ourselves up for failure if we're constantly striving for work-life balance. Because what the heck is that? Like, really, what is it?
You have to define it for yourself, what that means.
Exactly. Because really, if you are on the farm, whether like for me, I live on the farm, I farm with my family, I work full time off the farm, I volunteer in other capacities. So it's all part of my life.
Yes.
It's all part of my life. But if I'm actually doing my own self-maintenance, then I feel balanced.
Yeah. Yeah.
So take a moment when you are trying to reach that or cross work-life balance off your to-do list. Are you adding another thing to your list that you feel is impossible to achieve? Because then you're
Right.
setting yourself up for failure, which has negative mental health outcome.
Yeah. Earlier, my kids are now in their 20s, but when they were younger, and I was a single parent and in a career, and I'd have some folks would email me and say, "Oh, I'm seeing something coming in from you at 10 o'clock at night. Are you okay? You're working too late." I appreciated the recognition, but I would see back, no, that's balance for me, because my employer supported me to leave early to pick them up from school, or to go to the school play, to get them into bed, to never miss a meal with them. And then I put in some time to catch up on things at the end of the day. So that's a great point, Cynthia. That was my definition of balance, whereas somebody else seeing communication later in the evening may have think that it was out of whack, when it really enabled me the life that I wanted. So I think if we can, I love Catherine put in here, my 13, this is when we were talking about the removing women from the workforce, or disabling women from the workforce because of some of the barriers. My 13-year-old told me they call this the pink tax. So I love the phrase, but I also love that it's a 13-year-old that has that knowledge and information. So we're raising up the next generation, which is fantastic. We talked about this earlier when we connected, the three of us earlier the other week, and I mentioned at Syngenta, and these may be some things that others could do to support each other, but we do have a caregiver group within Syngenta, and that was born from employees saying, we feel this burden of the elderly parents, or kids, or mental health issues, or dealing with something within the family. And so the employees in our organization felt that they needed a caregiver group, and that's what that group focuses on. It educates internally, and provides insight into the leadership team on what's going on in the organization. So it's a very real need that we're all feeling, especially when often when we have dual parents working in a family. So it's just, and the other things I know that what Syngenta does, but it maybe apply to others. It's around that wellness piece, Cynthia. We focus a lot on that, and helping employees have the tools they need. So Headspace app around which has to do with health and fitness and meditation. Benefits, ensuring vacation time, like we have 6 weeks vacation, and that's a recognition that you need that time to recharge however you want to use that time. So all those kind of things sort of package into making sure that people are well set up for success, and that self-maintenance. It's going to be my new term. I love it. And just on that too, thinking about, and again, love the 13-year-old, it's maybe shaping the younger generation coming into the industry. So they think differently. We're already seeing it, but do they come in thinking differently about what it means to work on a farm, or work in agriculture, or just be employed, so that they have the mindset of the importance of farm safety and self-maintenance when they come into the industry. We have a couple minutes here, and we want to make sure we go to Q&A. We did have one question, so maybe I'll jump there before we get into the next section, so we allow folks to ask some questions. Courtney, would love to see the number of people who identified as men on calls like this be higher. Very good point. We did have one question in there, but I think it was removed. But if you want to post it back up, I know there was a question on what the trying to understand the question from Jacqueline. So Jacqueline, if you want to put it back in there, please do. Any other questions folks have? If not, we'll keep going with our discussion, but want to make sure we do leave some time if folks have any questions. Okay, we'll keep moving on here. Let's talk a little bit about, and we only have about 10 minutes left, but let's see if we can cover off on gender equity. And the Government Innovation, Science and Economic Development Initiative, they have their 50/30 challenge, and it's challenging organizations to support women leadership and underrepresented groups. And that's ensuring that women are represented and that their participation is supported and encouraged. So gender parity on farms, within academic programs, on ag boards. and in various leadership roles. Lori, maybe start with you. In your opinion, what steps can be taken to create a more inclusive and supportive environment for women with aspirations in the agriculture sector?
It's interesting that we're talking about this now because last week we just wrapped up what the Nova Scotia Apprenticeship Agency put on a farm technician apprenticeship level 1 program. And so it's people who are wanting to integrate into the agricultural field and perhaps work on farm, giving them what they need in relation to not just farm training, but safety training to go in with that particular type of work, which making it equal, which is excellent, and which is the support that I mentioned earlier that is needed to gain more ground and more respect for the women leaders who are leading the safety programs. So I think making farming a recognized trade and using it as a trade training group instead of maybe full degree programs or diploma programs, the shorter 5-week programs like this one was, we had 147 hours worth of learning delivered over a 5-week period, about 6 hours a day. And this allowed, and one of the ladies in the group was a mom. It allowed her to come to class after the kids got on the school bus. She attended class and then, of course, was able to do some work before the kids got home from school, and then was able to continue on after they went to bed, just kind of like your quote unquote work-life balance, right? So it's also less expensive. So they can attend, they can collect EI while they're doing these programs and learn at the same time. But the program also applies what they're learning at the same time. So they're practicing what they're learning and build the confidence to take that to the job they want to apply for. They can answer the questions on what this tool does, or they can cost out a fencing project, building a greenhouse. They have all the skills and knowledge now that they may not have picked up when they were worker or younger working, or if they hadn't even started working yet, if they were able to go through high school and not get to that point of needing or wanting a job at that, depending on other activities that may be going on in the household, right? And so I think funding for these types of programs and support for these types of programs are going to integrate women much more readily. Like the 2 comments from a couple of the ladies where they have so much more confidence now. Both were currently working on a farm or in a flower greenhouse area, and they were quite content to go back and share what they've learned and show that they could use these skills, and that would allow them to be promoted within those jobs too.
Right. And we talked at the opening a little bit, Lori, about, some of how you've built your career in organization on the importance of networking. And so I'm just curious, we could talk about that for a minute. And then I do want to get to the questions that have been put forward there. But Cynthia, can you talk a bit about how mentorship and networking opportunities can be enhanced for women pursuing careers in agriculture?
I think so. Something that came to mind for me, when we chatted a couple of weeks ago when we were preparing for this, was I think that having exposure, right? Like, I think most people have heard of the term common sense, but what we don't realize is that common sense is actually learning that we've done through situational exposure, like whether it's through our culture or within industry, that type of thing. So when I say culture, I'm speaking specifically about agriculture. And I think that if we are wanting to have more equity and balance across genders in agriculture, we need to be providing opportunities for our children, our teenagers, to see what folks can do in the agriculture industry. Even when it comes to school programming, and girls in some rural schools, girls may still be guided towards, oh, okay, well, you could be a nurse or you could be a teacher. No, you could run a multi-million-dollar corporation or be prime minister, So I think that really we need to recognize how rooted we are in kind of the history. Like the fact that a 13-year-old girl called it pink tax, I think is incredible. The youth that we have coming up are just they're really fantastic. They're really fantastic. So I think that if we can just kind of take ownership of what we're doing, I call it owning our awesomeness. If
Mhm.
we take ownership of our awesomeness more often, then perhaps our young women can as well.
Right. That's great. And Cindy's put a comment in there, are we raising our children to want to grow up to be farmers? I don't have the answer to that, but if we're, you know, if you see a fully supportive farm and a successful farm and all the roles that are involved, maybe, I don't know, I don't have the answer. I'm curious, your thoughts on that, Cynthia or Lori?
Well, my kids are, well, turning 19 and turning 22. 19-year-old is our daughter, and the almost 22-year-old is our son. And both of them have expressed an interest in agriculture. I think my goal in raising them was to be good human beings who contributed to the well-being of, you know, the world at large, really. So if they want to do that in agriculture, I'm super proud of that. I think that the most important piece to take away from, and Cindy, I commend you on, you know, your lifelong ambition. I think that we need to provide our kids the platform to do what they wish to do, and make sure that we're not influencing or forcing our kids to be someone that they're not choosing to be. So if you can provide them the opportunity and allow them, like, have that exposure to,
Right.
you know, the different aspects of agriculture. It may not be specifically owning your own farm, but it may be working in an agricultural industry, or research, whatever, what have you,
Yes.
that contributes to sustainability in agriculture.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I know we talk at Syngenta about bringing others into the agriculture industry, and there's so many roles that can play in it, from educator to finance to communication, to on farm. So, Lori, did you have an additional comment?
Quick comment, absolutely. Programs like Ag in the Classroom, I think, have become quite valuable because
Yeah.
all the kids, regardless of where they're coming from within that school, are getting the exposure now. And that hasn't been something that's been promoted throughout the years. You're getting your doctors, your lawyers, your dentists, and those types of vocations are most commonly represented when you're learning in school. And I think putting Ag in the Classroom and getting this out there more is going to be quite valuable and kind of gear our kids to understanding there's more to do, and that might be something that suits them best.
Correct. We did have a couple of questions in there, and then Robin, maybe I'll just ask you to come back on to close it out, and you may have answered some of these. But Andrea's comment from CASA is, you know, it can seem overwhelming, and what big goals could we strive to, but can we, what small bites can we take? And I think we're going to have a poll at the end. If you can think about one or two things and some of the feedback that you've heard today, there may be one or two small bits that we can take. And Ravi has a comment here, and he's my colleague. Have you tried to highlight the cost of not implementing safety on the farm to gain support from family members? And talked a little bit about that, right? That cost deficit that happens through some of this. And I don't know if that data is specifically related to the loss of farm income or the financial loss from farm injury. And Robin, I think you probably have that.
So we have a bit of older data that we absolutely
Okay.
need to work on getting updated. But in 2004, I'm going to have to look at it so I don't get it wrong. There was a smart risk report done. And at that time, and so this is now 20 years ago, farm-related preventable injuries cost the Canadian economy $373 million and 184 lives in 2004. So we saw almost 4,000 people hospitalized, over 72,000 emergency visits, and over 1,000 people are permanently disabled. So the direct costs in 2004 were 208 million, and the indirect costs were 165 million. And we do know that lots of farms can't survive the death of the primary producer. Unfortunately, it just seems that takes the momentum away from that farm. And I know you do definitely hear those conversations about people chipping in during harvest when someone's been lost, and that sort of thing. And that's wonderful to see those communities come together. But at the end of the day, preventable, you know, fatalities and injuries is the best way to keep those farm families, thriving and successful.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well,
Good question.
that's a great closing comment, Robin. I know we're at time here, and I think are we popping up a final survey? I'm not sure if
We
we have
sure are.
time to do that, but
We'd like to do some more things for women in ag at CASA. So we would love to hear from our folks, our audience here today. What can we do in the next year? And you know, we want to do more, but these are things we for sure can do one of these things. So we'd like to know what you think we should be doing. So if Ron could pop up that last poll, that would be great. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or feedback or concerns, we would love to hear from you. And if you'd like to contact any of our panelists, you can contact CASA and we will make that happen. Their dynamic trio here of I took so many notes. I've got a lot of notes. I'm so excited. Thank you so much, all three of you, for making the time on this International Women's Day, you know, to
Robin.
celebrate. Thank you so
Yes.
much. I don't know where Ron, are you going to pop up that poll?
Maybe while that's coming in, I'll just say thank you so much, Robin, Megan, CASA, for your leadership again in this space. And Cynthia and Lori, I have learned a ton. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and raising some of the issues for women on the farm, but some of them are applicable off the farm too, and more broadly in our industry. So, you know, on an optimistic note, I love the self-maintenance. I love the telling each other we're awesome. I love some of the comments in the chat there. So at a minimum, we can keep that going to support each other in helping feed the world, really. There you go, Robin, you got your
Perfect.
direction.
That's helpful. And thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your International Women's Day and weekend.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.